Banks checked his phone. His acting sergeant had nothing to report. The corpses of Lomax and the other cops were on ice in the Port Louis morgue, stacked up like pizzas, Banks assumed. The maid who'd found the commissioner's body was under sedation. Her statement could be interpreted to mean that masked gangsters had entered the governor's mansion and murdered him. Okay, the detective thought. Lomax was dirty. Everyone knew. I can at least hint that in an official report. Same goes for the other three. But I have to steer clear of the whole Saint-Pierre issue, so as not to upset Martin Gale. Therefore I'll just hint that the fishing village was being used to smuggle in drugs from, say, Colombia, via Brazil, maybe Venezuela. Banks felt a vaguely plausible story forming in his mind as he sat there, surrounded by the portraits of previous governors and other British worthies. He looked up at one painting whose subject seemed to be staring down his aristocratic nose at Banks. The long-dead nobleman's haughty expression suggested that he wanted to scrape Banks off his shoe. "Not you never lied or bullshitted, you old hypocrite," Banks muttered. There was a noise, like a high-pitched titter. It came from low down on the floor right next to the old sofa. The overstuffed leather arm of the sofa blocked Banks' view. His arm was hanging down, and he felt something brush against the back of his hand. Something hairy, warm, very much alive. He jumped up, backing off a few paces. The monkey leapt up, perching on the dark red leather. It chittered at him, bared its little teeth. Its head, tilted to one side as folklore had always insisted, made it seem almost comical at first, until he saw its eyes. They burned with pure malevolence, tiny, bloodshot, black. They were the eyes, not of a wild creature, but of something far worse. In them, Banks saw an intelligence unlike that of a man, but not that of a beast. No, this was an inhuman mind that contemplated him, in fury and contempt. Oh my God! The words seemed to upset the creature. It bounced up and down on its hind limbs, flailing its hairy arms. It was so close that, even in the poorly lit atrium, Banks could make out the torn and scorched little jacket it wore. Its body showed scars of ancient wounds, not quite healed. It smoked a little, here and there, and now Banks could smell it, a pungent aroma of burned flesh and hair. He recalled stories he'd heard about how the French had tried to kill the damned thing in so many ways. It's all true. A carefully built but still flimsy partition in Banks' mind collapsed. He'd spent months trying to protect his worldview from the legend, because a world where the legend was true called everything into question. Now reality had to be rethought from the ground up, and it was too much for a flabby 53-year-old police officer who'd disgraced himself back at Scotland Yard. He staggered against the wall, felt the frame of a painting jab into his back. It was a reminder of the mundane reality that had just been undermined. It didn't make him feel any better to know he would have a bruise. Familiar. That was the word. The monkey thing was Lemaitre's familiar, the demonic messenger and spy given to all those who trafficked with evil. From a silly gimmick, the monkey charm sold to tourists, the creature had suddenly become very real. "What do you want?" he demanded. It was a stupid question, yet Banks couldn't help himself. The creature chittered at him, hopped sideways onto the back of the sofa. The menacing approach made Banks slide along the wall, dislodging the painting, which fell with a startling thud. The familiar became even more excited and bounded toward him. Banks flung up his arms in front of his face, lost his balance, fell sideways. He anticipated the rending of teeth and claws, the stench of burned and rotten flesh. "Mr. Banks?" He opened his eyes to see two sets of toes a few inches from his face. The governor's secretary was leaning over him, puzzled and concerned. He laughed in relief, then started to struggle upright. The young woman did not offer to help. Instead, she looked at the painting lying on the floor. Banks had landed heavily and broken the frame. "I'm sorry," he said. I was just—" He paused. A silver-plated monkey charm dangled from the young woman's left wrist. She saw where he was looking, and her dark eyes widened. They shared a moment of clarity. Banks knew she could see the truth in his face. No persuasion needed. "It was in here," Banks confirmed. "If I were you, I'd look for another job, pronto. Sorry about the picture, but it's not like there's a shortage." The girl nodded distractedly. and scurried back into her office. Banks was just driving off when he saw the secretary emerge from the mansion, phone clutched to her ear. He guessed she was not talking about pampering sessions this time.